Okay, I think we'll begin now. So, hello everyone. Welcome to today's session on Innovator's Toolbox with Nitya. It's really good to see all of you here. Before we begin, just some information for you. Raise your hand or use the Q&A section that you can see on the bottom if you have any questions. You can use the chat window, as I see some of you are already using it. You can use the chat window to interact with the other people. And a recorded version of this webinar will be shared with you later after the session. Okay. So meanwhile, we're waiting for a couple of more people to join. I'll quickly give you an introduction about NUMA before we get into the webinar. I am Madhusha Mishra. I head corporate relations for NUMA Bengaluru. Could we go to the next slide? NUMA, we're an international innovation and learning hub for the digital age. What we do is we future-proof organizations and tech startups by making change happen faster with greater impact. NUMA, it was born in early 2000 as a non-profit association of entrepreneurs to support other startups in Paris. We were called Silicon Sontier. We worked very closely with the startups in France and have seen the birth of the digital era. So we launched the first co-working space and the first acceleration program in France. What we also realized at that point is the potential in the emerging ecosystems and perhaps our capability to build or replicate the model and build an ecosystem from scratch. So 2013 also marked the birth of NUMA. NUMA means numeric human. We also expanded to other countries in 2015, including India. So we started as a pure player acceleration program and soon evolved into an entity that supported other open innovation programs that were powered by NUMA. Today, through different products and services, we work on projects across 8 different Indian cities. We've created about 7 open innovation programs in India. We worked on 84 innovation projects. And in doing so, we've been able to build a very strong network of mentors, experts, startups in our community that really make us who we are. Going forward, it is our vision to be or to empower innovators in Southeast Asia. With this, I thank you again for joining. Glad to see all of you here. The topic we are covering today is core to what we do. So I hope you have a great session. I'll let Nitya take you forward. Over to you, Nitya. Nitya, you're on mute. I'm sorry.
Yes, can you hear me? Good. So hi, everyone. Thank you, Madhusha, for the introduction. Welcome. I'm really glad to be talking to all of you here. And thanks for making it at 4 p.m. on a Monday. I hope it's an interesting session for you, as interesting as I have had preparing for it. To introduce myself, I'm Nitya, Head of Design at NUMA. And because of this role, as Madhusha said, I've actually had the opportunity to work with a lot of different kinds of people, different organizations, whether they are startups or NGOs or even product teams in multinational corporates. And because of this, I get to wear multiple hats on my everyday journey. Sometimes I act as a coach or a facilitator in design, where I help product teams navigate through their product to get them to actually produce something that is user-friendly, that is usable by everyone. And as a mentor, I talk about a lot of different topics, such as UX of digital products, user-centered and sustainable design, as well as research. But one of the main roles for me in NUMA and in generally as a practitioner of innovation and service design is actually to come up with frameworks and methodologies that actually help people achieve this innovation faster, with more quality and better than they're doing now. And NUMA, as Madhusha said, has over 20 years, a legacy of 20 years of working with startups on the ground, working with multinationals. So the hybrid methodology that we use right now is actually something that has come out of real, you would say, real experiences with people, real companies. We've seen some of the companies scale really well. And so we are able to really understand what works for them and what doesn't. And when we combine these three key indicators of the lean methodology and combine it with design thinking or the human-centered design process, it can really give some great results. So today, my idea is actually to take you through some of the tools and methodologies that I use in different scenarios, and also give you a peek into how you can use it yourself as well. But consider this. We can assume that almost anything can be considered as a system. A system is something that is a whole, but it has a lot of moving parts that make it what it is. A product can be a system. If you can take something like a phone, there's someone who actually manufactures it, someone who designs it, someone who markets it, and then finally the end user who's actually using it, like you and me. Similarly, a service. I think we're all lucky to have so many services surrounding us today. Anything from our food delivery systems to something that makes our commute easy, to a lot of services that are actually business to business. And this too is a system by itself, and it has a lot of moving parts. We can even go further and say that an organization is a system. The bigger the organization, the more complex it is. So the more departments you have, the more teams you have, the more projects and processes that you're coming up with. And this is why anything or any system includes certain procedures, tasks, schedules, etc., which is delivered to the customer. And the main question for me today, I will ask you after this short video. So the interesting story about this is, of course, we can all understand that the product was a failure. But the question is why? First of all, imagine the system in which it was created. There were so many people, resources who put in their hours to actually create something that they thought will be useful for the end consumer. And the product is not the only failure in this system. After this video went viral on YouTube, actually, is when people started realizing this bug or this small problem that it has. And therefore, the investors lost money. And the CEO of this Juicero actually came out to clarify to people that there's a label on Juicero that says you're not supposed to squeeze it by hand. And if you use it with the machine, there are additional benefits. But in the end, people are going to use products the way they use it. And it's the most cliched thing, but we all know that the customer is always right. So for me today, what I'm trying to do is ask a question, and through the tools and methodologies, try to answer it for you. And this is the big question. How can product owners, entrepreneurs, organizations use innovation tools effectively? Now, admittedly, this is quite a broad topic. Innovation itself is so large. Anything from a safety pin to one of the most sophisticated technological advancements has a tag of innovation these days. So who are these innovators? To me, for today, the innovators are not only the people who invent products, but the people who want to actually stay ahead of the curve, to scale their products, to scale their teams, to make their company and team culture something that is good and productive at the same time. And someone who wants to make a positive change in whatever stage that they are in. So keeping this in mind, going forward, I'm going to be presenting to you 6 areas of intervention that, according to me, are key in order to actually make this possible. So these are my top 6 areas of intervention. And before I go further, a few words on this. So I came up with these 6 areas after actually having worked with different types of systems, as I spoke. So single entrepreneurs working on their product, as well as teams and multinationals who have sort of vague or specific projects that they have to work through. And my recommendation is that no matter what stage or time you are in your own system, most of these tools will actually help you navigate to a positive and output-oriented result that you're looking for. So going forward, I will be actually presenting a couple of tools that fall under each of these 6 areas that I've identified. I know we have only about an hour's time to complete all of it. So I've tried my best to not only give you the most effective tools that have worked for me, but also certain scenarios in which they work the best. To start off, my first area is the big picture. So this, I think, is very important because it answers the most important question of all, which is the why. Take a look at these images here. What you see is 2 images that were created by French artists and creative thinkers who were asked to imagine the future in 100 years. So they were asked to imagine the year 2000 in the 1900s. And what you see here are 2 such images that came out of this exercise. I think you'll all agree that it's not accurate what they have over here. I know that none of us have knowledge wired directly to our head through a book churning machine. But what is really interesting is that they might have got the scenario wrong, but the core of the vision is really true. Just look at today, we have access to knowledge like never before. We have services that come and provide everything to us at the doorstep. So it's really interesting that the vision is important, and even though they could not imagine the technology that took them to that vision. And this is what the big picture thinking is. When you know why you're doing something, whether it's why you're creating a product or why your team is actually working towards something, it's very easy for the others to follow suit. When you know the why, you have a vision, and so you can build the strategy, the how, and the what. I have these 2 resources that go quite deep into actually how you can apply this methodology. And from me, when you can actually use it is, I would recommend at the beginning of every project, when you need to get your teammates together, when you need to know, when you have a common understanding of the goal that you're going towards. It's also very useful in terms of startups when you're going through a pivot to actually re-ask this question of why you're doing something and whether the pivot makes sense in that time. And it's always good to have your vision out there for future reference so that you can always come back to it as a North Star. The second tool that I'm talking about here is called vision mapping. And I have found this extremely helpful. What it is actually a simple XY, I would say XY axis. And the tool works like this, where you can add different criteria on each side of the XY axis and map your own theme or topic according to where you're at. This specific XY axis comes in handy, especially when I work with corporate acceleration. I think many of you will know that I help design many corporate accelerators. And what this is a system by itself. It's a program by itself. So the main question here, or the why that every person or every project team has to ask is, why are they doing that? And how will the accelerator shape itself because of the question why? For example, many of the clients that I've worked with already have great ideas. They have, they have great problem statements, challenge areas. The only problem is they want a lot of different kinds of ideas that come for it. And in this case, it is almost like they need people from different domains, not just one. The second scenario is that you have already a solution in mind, but you cannot produce it in-house, maybe because you need a different technology, or maybe because you need a different kind of thought process. And in this case, the second scenario works very well, where you actually scope out only the kind of startups or organizations that can help you exchange that information. And the final one is almost blue sky, because you have a lot of opportunity to create something out of dormant assets. And you need to identify people who can actually be creative and come up with something to address that. And another XY axis that is also very interesting is used to ask people before they start a project, right? When you start an introductory discussion with your team, you want everyone on the same page. When you're trying to strategize on which area you really have to put your money into or your resources into, and when you have to make decisions, this XY axis really is simple, but it works quite well. And finally, you might have a vision, you might already know what you're doing, but if it's not articulated in some form, maybe we all aren't as good artists as the French that we saw earlier, but we still need something to actually be set in, not stone, but set in paper or set digitally, so that you are still on the same page and you can use this words of articulation to actually bring out the vision that you have in many different ways. This kind of exercise is very useful when you've had lengthy discussions and strategies on the vision, and you want to take a break, but you still have to stay productive. You don't want to lose all the information that you actually got together with your team, and to make sure that everyone is aligned. So talking about working together, I think collaboration, all of you would agree, is something that is really core to how an organization or system functions. There are different kinds of collaborations. You can be talking to someone who has the same knowledge base as you. You can be talking to someone who has a completely different set of skills. You might need two different organizations to collaborate together with their knowledge. And I'll take you through some cases that are good tools. So firstly, workshops. I think I'll get this obvious one out of the way. I do a lot of workshops, whether it's design thinking workshops for skill building, or whether it's larger workshops or boot camps. And workshops, differing from the common opinion, is not just a bunch of people getting together with post-its and doing icebreakers. I think a workshop that's done well is basically creating a framework for people who have different skills, different knowledge levels, to actually work together to produce something better. So collaboration only works when the two or three or how many ever parties that are collaborating together produce something better than they could have if they were doing it themselves. In the image that you see here, it's actually a workshop that was conducted between BWSSB, which is the waterworks company in Bangalore, with one of the large multinational water management companies. And what's happening in the screen behind all of them sitting are actually the top 9 challenge areas for Bangalore in terms of water. So water management, how you make sure that water reaches everyone in the city. And it's basically quite serious topic. So how do you actually get two different organizations, two different entities who might have their own strategies, who might have their own visions that are different visions, together to come together and pick something? So this workshop was actually to bring them together to decide on which of these 9 are the most impactful for them singularly and for them together, so that they can actually invest into a project to make that happen. So this framework really helps when you want to get people on the same page, when you want outcomes in short times, when you don't have months and months to make a decision. And it's very useful to actually teach or upskill, because just learning from people with different skill levels is upskilling in itself. And talking about this, this is one of my new favorite tools, and this is called the guided meetings. I think we've all been there. Long meetings, conversations that go on and on, conversations leading to more questions than solutions in the end. Maybe just a written note at the end of everything that was discussed, but still nothing actionable. And guided meetings are a really great way, because they are short and they are output oriented. But of course, there's a twist. It's not as easy as that. The twist is that at least one person who is going to be in the meeting needs to know exactly what they have to get out of it, or the objective. When they do that, they can do most of the work to set up this guided meeting, so that everyone else that they invite only have to provide inputs. For example, when you need tangible outcomes from multiple different team members, so maybe you need everyone to agree on a specific thing and give a go ahead in a certain direction, and it takes a long time because everyone really has their own point of view. Maybe you can set up a voting session, or maybe you can set up a no talking session where everyone just gives their inputs in the dedicated space where they have to. Similarly, when you know that a colleague of yours has something to share, has a knowledge that you don't, but they don't have it in the format that is useful for you, then you can prepare that format so that they can give it for you. And this is highly effective if you're able to plan it well. Now, moving on to my third topic, which is research. It's quite vast. There are so many different kinds of research, and it comes to use in so many different scenarios. As a designer, I naturally tend towards user-centered design or research, which talks about understanding or knowing your end user very well, so that you can create according to the pains that they have, according to the behaviors that they show, and you can serve them better and better. But in a system, especially for someone like a startup, it's very important to know where you're placed in the whole ecosystem. So what is your market like? What are competitors doing? Where are you really placed in the whole ecosystem? And so different kinds of research methodologies help achieving that. And finally, for product teams, it's very important to be able to create small experiments with your products and test it out with people to see which is a better strategy to achieve your vision that we spoke about. A little story here, and this is about McDonald's. I think quite a few years ago, McDonald's wanted to promote or increase the sales of their milkshake. What they did was ask a ton of their users what they would like in better in their milkshake, and people came out and said different flavors, fruity flavors, chocolatey flavors, etc. But even though they introduced these things, the sales weren't really doing anything. So what they did was they employed someone to actually camp out at a McDonald's for 18 to 20 hours and observe every little thing that happened. They wanted to know who are these people buying milkshakes in the first place? What are their behaviors? Are they sitting inside? Are they going, taking it away? What is it? And this is in the US. And what they discovered was quite interesting. They saw that most of the people who bought milkshakes bought it in the morning, early in the morning. They always took it away. Nobody sat inside and had it. And they were all well dressed. And so the next day, when they asked these people, they discovered that people who buy these milkshakes are people for whom it's too early to have breakfast, but they have a long commute to their workplace. So by the time they get there, they're going to get hungry. So this milkshake was just something that can keep them company for their commute. And so, having known this insight, McDonald's went ahead and really created the milkshake as a breakfast food. They made it thick, they added proteins, etc., and that basically helped them achieve the goal that they wanted to. And why I told you that is mainly to bring you to my first tool on research. It's one of my favorite tools. I admit that I use it almost in every kind of workshop or every kind of discussion that I have with people, mainly because it's extremely simple, but it's so versatile. What a journey map is basically looking at a product or a service from your end user's perspective, and you break it up into small parts. You break it up into every action step that a person takes to get from A to B. And A to B could be for them to purchase something, for them to travel from A to B, whatever it is. You break it up. And the best part is that just by doing this, just by breaking it up, uh, you will learn so much more about your product, even if you were the one to build it. And this is because just the action of breaking it down helps you find opportunities. It helps you identify areas where you can improve your product. And even if you don't have a product, for example, this comes in very handy. Assume you want to create better shopping solutions for the elderly, and you don't know what product you want to create. In these cases, you can always map the journey of what is happening currently without the product you have in mind, and find opportunities of what are the pain points, what are the things, what are the spots in these steps that you can actually intervene and bring your product into. And if you already have a product, it's a really great tool because you can give a structure to what is happening, and give a structure to the concept that you have. When I talk about benchmarking, I think almost everyone who's joined here would have heard of it. It's a widely used tool. It is mainly understanding or identifying your competitors in order to see relatively where you stand. I still wanted to put this in here because it's really important to know this. Not only because, not, I would say, not to copy features or anything, but when you're looking, when you're at the time when you want to expand your offerings, when you want to take the next step in your product or service or even team, it's really good to understand what the people around you are doing. What are their best practices? What is it specifically that they did well, because of which they got from A to B, which is the B that you want? And it doesn't always have to be benchmarking against your competitors. You can benchmark against some of your analogous products that would also give you quite a lot of insights. And the next one is affinity mapping or clustering. This is usually used after user research, after you've done interviews or after you have a ton of data that you need to categorize. So what comes out of it is basically putting a lot of different various kinds of data together and forming certain categories, forming themes, and visualizing this data so that in your mind, as well as whoever sees it, there's a clear understanding of what are the patterns that are emerging. It's really helpful when there's a lot of raw data that you have, when you have data from different formats. And even if it's not used in terms of user research, even if you don't have interviews, this tool, when you use it with post-its on a wall, can really help you simplify very complex interdependencies between, say, certain features of your platform, etc., to actually bring out which of your features is a star feature. And this brings me to communication. I think everything that I spoke about before, you have to collaborate, you have to have a big picture, you have to know and understand your competition. But nothing really, your project is only as good as your ability to convince people. Earlier, right at the beginning, when I spoke about who is an innovator who wants to make change, an innovator who wants to stay ahead of the curve, an innovator who wants to motivate their own team, you need to be able to communicate to the people, to your stakeholders in different ways according to where you're at. And this first template is something, it's widely used by our startups. It's a basic 10-point way to talk about your product. But more than that, if you look a little bit deep into what those 10 points say, you can see that it almost captures everything that I spoke to about before: the why, the dream, the vision of the product, the how are your strategies or products that are actually getting you there, the research about understanding where you are in the market, the business model that you're working on, your competition, and your team, which is also very important: how you collaborate, how you work together, how you have a balance of knowledge in your team. And this tool doesn't have to be only used by startups, and it doesn't have to be used as 1 to 10. You can literally think of anything that you want to communicate right now, think of who you need to communicate it to, and figure out which of these is the right channel for you to communicate. For example, the first 3 is a perfect elevator pitch. When you have very little time to tell someone about your product, it's a great way to just start with the why and the what. Also, when you're talking to your stakeholders in terms of teams or product teams or project teams, it's not always that you're talking or pitching to someone. You just have to communicate something that's important. And again, in that, you can consider what you need to say and which is the best channel to say it. But one of the issues is that you don't always have the people that you want to communicate to in front of you or face to face. Sometimes the people that you have to communicate to is a large customer base for your product. And this sentence, perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away, really tells the point. When I must admit, actually, when I work with a lot of teams, I get a lot of pushback on this specific tool, and it's very understandable. So I have product teams telling me that, we spent weeks, months developing product, by hand. We did all the details. We have a product that's running. We put so many hours. Doesn't it water it down to present it in a cartoony format, something like this? I mean, what is the point of doing so much work when we have to break it down into something that doesn't look so serious? And it's true, of course, this specific box looks quite cartoonish. But the idea here is that you need to be able to communicate even complex things very simply. Take this example, which came out very recently. This was brought by the partnership of Apple and Google when they decided to create a solution to tackle the pandemic that we are all facing. And as you can see, it's a very serious topic, first of all, and it's admittedly probably a complex product that they have come up with and would have taken some time. But what they're doing here is communicating to all of us in 4 to 5 simple steps. And this is what it's all about. When you're able to communicate even your most complex projects very simply, so that the person in front of you or the person who's not even looking at you is able to understand it, you've done it. You've communicated quite efficiently. So you can use this tool when after you have a concept, when you want to really put it out into the world, when you want to convey complex ideas simply. You can even do this storyboarding technique combined with one of the techniques I spoke about before, which is the guided meetings. So you have your team and you want them to really break down certain complex things into a very small parts. You create the framework for this so that others can just tell you what has to go in there. And it also is a great way for you to discover your own star features. What is that feature that set you apart from the competitors out there? And then finally, I'm coming to creativity and rigidity. Sorry, I'm just, yes. Creativity and rigidity. So I think this thing, the balance between creativity and rigidity is extremely important. And I've seen time and again with almost every kind of person that I've worked with, that the answer to being effective lies somewhere over here. I think in the pre-survey that we had sent you, I had a lot of people asking about how to have, how to have an innovative workplace, how to keep people motivated, how to make sure they innovate at all times. And this balance striking between your creative processes and your rigid processes or frameworks is where this lies. So for creativity, one of the first and quite popular tools is ideation. There are literally hundreds of tools of ideation. I only put three here. Rapid sketching, when you have a very little amount of time, but you need to come up with a lot of ideas. This puts you in a sort of pressure situation, which actually helps you come up with a lot of great ideas, whether they're stupid or not, it doesn't matter, because just putting it out there is more important. Just doing is more important than not doing. Similar goes to brainstorm. When you're working with a team, you start at the same place and you emerge and you evolve your ideas together. Random associations is another one, where you put two completely different concepts or ideas together, force them together, and see what comes out of it. And these are all just basic triggers to help you help your mind do the work. Actually, it's just triggering you. And this can come in handy in a lot of times, but I recommend that you ideate only after you have an opportunity or a problem that you want to solve, and not just write out of with an blank slate. It's helpful when you're working on contests or hackathons, when you have a very little amount of time to produce something. So you time box yourself, ideate, pick the best one, and just go for it. And it's also a very good tool. Sometimes I see that in many of the teams, the way teams are formed, there are always certain people who are more dominant. They have always something to say, some opinions, etc., and some others who are not so not so active, just because of personality traits. And so doing these kind of activities really helps bring everyone together so that they all have a say. The next one, and I think this one is a really interesting tool specifically for creativity and rigidity, because it's the perfect balance of it. The 6 thinking hats is a technique as simple as it looks. When you wear a certain hat, either the hat of an optimist, an idea generator, or a pessimist, you're only allowed to think in that one channel. So, for example, if I were to be wearing a optimist hat in a team meeting, I would only be talking about what's good about things that are happening, what is going well, things that could happen, that could help us. Whereas if you're wearing a technical feasibility hat, you're always thinking about, is this possible? Is this feasible? Do we have the resources to do something? So when you work as a team, you can either do it that in a workshop setting where you switch that every person always wears a single hat like an optimist, and you go a full circle for all six. Or when you're in a team, you can each assign a hat for yourselves and make sure that you have a 360 view of the topic or problem that's at hand. And it really helps you get a holistic view on the topic that you're talking about. And especially also coming up with ideas, and when you're trying to figure out alternate strategies to what your goal is. Time boxing is also something that I've started doing recently. I think my team has been quite annoyed with me because every once in a while I ask them to experiment with this. So a certain day it would be 30 minutes, some days it will be 53 minutes and a half, because some research shows that 53 minutes is the optimum time to be productive. But nevertheless, I think time boxing is very interesting. It has proven to be quite productive. Uh, because first of all, you have a very specific set amount of time to achieve a certain goal. And it not only lets you complete that goal, but it helps you focus. You're supposed to keep all your other distractions away for that 30 minutes or whatever. No phones, no mails, nothing. Just do the thing that you're supposed to do. There are also a lot of people in teams that are they have perfectionist tendencies, right? Just if I work on it for half an hour more, it'll be much better than what it is now. Just give me 1 hour more, and that happens a lot. And this really helps us keep that in check, see where you're at, and you can always add another 30 minutes if you want to improve something. And just putting people in that pressure box situation helps to be creative. I mean, when you have only 30 minutes and your goal is really much bigger than you have the time for, you find creative ways to achieve it. Maybe you ask someone else for help, but that's not out of the rules, right? So it really helps build your creativity as well. And the next one, and this has as NUMA, we have been practicing OKR technique for a couple of years now. OKR, or Objective and Key Results, was developed by Intel. It's basically a goal setting methodology where you have certain measurable goals to achieve, measurable tasks to achieve your goal. And it's highly popular now with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, but also with a lot of startups. Um, Over here, you can see an illustration of what this OKR methodology looks like, where you have a vision on top of what you want to achieve, a mission below that, so a shorter term vision, let's say, and a couple, maybe 1 to 4 objectives that fall under it. And these objectives each have key results which are measurable. They have metrics attached to them. And each of them can further have your tasks or small actions. I think a lot of companies that we work with now have actually adopted OKR technique. One of our corporate acceleration partners have completely converted from their regular KPI mechanism to an OKR to run the corporate accelerator, not just the accelerator team, but also encouraging the startups that are in the program to follow it. And one of the reasons why it's such a success is because it follows 90-day cycles. You have to achieve your key results in 90-day circles. So you're making this change happen faster, and you have people, there are people called OKR champions who actually make sure that these things are happening in an orderly manner. But beyond that, I think what I find most interesting in this one is that it really goes back to what I was talking about in the beginning, right? The big picture, the vision. You can see that when you have a vision that you're aligned to, you have your mission and objectives and what you need to achieve. A lot of people think that innovation is thinking of new ideas, being creative in coming up with products. But that's just half the story. What happens when you have to achieve it? How do you really make your teams, make your different people, stakeholders work towards that vision or work towards that creative idea that you have? Operations is really something that follows. So an innovation is not just creative thinking of vision, but how the channels that you have, the channels or frameworks that actually make you achieve it at the end. And this brings me to my sixth and final area, technology. And I would say technology is somewhat an outlier in from these six, mainly because technology, the way I view it, is an enabler. If we go right to the beginning where we spoke about the vision of the French artists, they did not know what kind of technological advancements that were going to happen, but they could still envision it. And people still today have used technology in not the way they imagined it, but in much better ways, I would say, much more sophisticated technology to actually help achieve that vision, help achieve the lifestyle that is being spoken of here. So in this section, I'm going slightly off the tools, the concept that I've been going on, but I'm bringing you some of the technologies or some of the digital platforms that have actually helped me do my job, helped my team and me collaborate, communicate, do research, all of the things that I spoke about. And so let's look at them. I think workshops was something that I spoke to you at the beginning, and we really have an opportunity in this crisis because we all need to still collaborate, still work, still have outputs. And I find that these digital whiteboard apps such as Mural and Miro really help when you want to conduct online workshops. They're good for meetings as well. It has a lot of frameworks that people can use pre-built into it. And it's a great tool really to collaborate and work together. The second one, of course, we use Slack for for communication inside the organization. But another reason that I like Slack is for the great resources that it has inside it. There are some very interesting channels. And for whoever is watching, if you have specific areas of interest, whether it's development, whether it's design, innovation, whatever it is, if you just Google Slack channels for these topics, I'm sure you'll come up with a lot of great channels that have resources in them. And it's quite active as well. And then the next one is Figma. This is mainly for people who are more into UX, who are developing or designing digital products. I think Figma is a great tool for collaboration because it helps people work on the same thing and make decisions very easily. And it's also great for digital outputs to work with a team. And then, of course, I use Google Suite a lot, even before the remote ways of working that we are in now. I think my whole team used this because we were able to really share and work quite efficiently and quickly. But beyond the obvious, what I like about this is that the range of extensions that you have with them. If you do a little bit of research, there are really a lot of extensions that can help you, from font finding to formatting your presentations or reports. There are really a ton of resources out there, and they are quite simple to get as well, just a click and a download. And this one, the last one, Notion, is something that I discovered quite recently, or at least started using quite recently. It's a beautiful app. It's used for many things. It's used sometimes as a CRM tool, but I find it great for note keeping for yourself or for your team as well. And I'm still playing around with it, and will probably look at the possibilities of how it works as a CRM tool as well for NUMA. I will let you know how it goes. And I think this brings me to almost the end of what I have to say. One of the things that I would still like all of you to take away from this is that I spoke about a lot of tools. I spoke about when and how you can use them. And that is really the most important thing. If you're able to identify through your big picture which of these areas of interventions really is something that you need right now, depending on the time. So depending on how long you have been working on something, as well as the scenario in which it is placed. If you're able to identify that, there are so many more tools under each of these that can help you. Because one of the worst things, and this has happened to me before, is that a lot of people ask me for a list of tools that I use, and I have obliged. I always send out resources to whoever asks. And when you do this, when you just send out all the resources that you have or a list of tools, it doesn't go really with how and when you use it, right? So when you use it at the wrong junction, it will not give you the result that you really are expecting. So I think that is something that everyone will agree is that the right time to use it makes it effective, makes it usable to everyone. And so I think that is the end of my talk. Thank you everyone for joining. But I know that we have a lot of people who have joined us today who have their own products, who have their own teams or product teams that you want to share that have worked for you in these cases, stories or case studies about the innovation to.
We'll enable the option from here. You can also ask your questions in the Q&A. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask about the session, also try to, we've had, while we were hosting them here itself. A lot of you are asking for recommendations on tools and books. Webinar is over. We'll be sending across some reference toolkit to you, so you can have some of Nitya's recommendations on that list.
Yes, I have already have written a few of them, so you will be getting them. Thanks, okay. Vivek. Nice to see you here. Of help.
Okay.
Own ideas or
raised hands. I'm just trying to enable the option.
Sure. So Vivek, I see your question about we came up with our very first set of OKR, what had to be done. But I think the tasks as well, the subtasks, and how much time I would say to do it with someone who knows the second cycle on. It's a really good tool because you learn already from even 1 week of doing your OKR, how you could have changed that certain objective such that it could have been achievable in an easier way. Hopefully that helps. And I would also be glad to help if you want. I think this question that Tanik has posted on how sort of a long answer, and I wouldn't say direct. when I spoke about the balance between rigidity and creativity, it's somewhere over there. Have to be motivated and know that innovate, come up with something or a creation. Just small areas or small steps of doing that is innovation itself. And in order to maintain this innovation culture, actually, I mean, you need to focus on the environment in which it is placed in. So how are your frameworks? Are they open enough to help people talk about this, talk about innovative ideas, or is the framework so rigid that you can't? So it's a balance, I would say, between these two, like how open you keep your culture, and at certain times when you don't need that openness, how you channel the innovation, how you make good ideas actually reach where they have to, due to the frameworks that you have in place.
Okay. Manu, you had raised your hands. Would you like to take your question? Are you there? Okay, Nitya, I think
Yeah.
there are some more questions that people had asked during the registration. Maybe we can pull that up. Would you like to conclude the session, Nitya? In the meantime, I'll also look up for some questions.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I wanted to just conclude having people discuss their own stories as well. I feel like because this was a one-way sort of thing, it's even good to see the questions over here, and I'm glad that it's helpful as well. And I think to answer some of the questions, I think we will definitely be sharing the presentation as well as some of the other tools that I have that I could not really go through all of it today, along with some links to good books and resources that can help you. I think basically, I mean, I don't know whether I should conclude yet or whether you're giving me questions, but for me, it was very interesting to actually go through all the tools and think about how they can help me because, yeah, I think someone.
No, just a couple of questions that are there in the chat window. So Bhanu Prakash has asked that during economic crisis or turn down, organizations today are focusing more on business but less or nothing on innovation. Is it a good strategy, and how can we balance during these times of economic crisis?
Okay. Yeah. So one of the things over here, I think it's also maybe not politically correct to say this exactly. But one of the things I also believe is that innovation can happen not only when you're in an innovation team. So if I understand that, of course, organizations have to prioritize also on how they can keep their business running, how they can make sure they don't have to lay off employees. And there are some big questions that they really have to answer, especially at the time like this in a pandemic. But of course, crisis, historically speaking, have been the reasons for a lot of technological and innovation outcomes. The wars, for example, really brought about so many types of innovations, not just in products, but also communication strategies, etc. So I think while it's not great to stop innovating, it should still have an innovation culture where people are able to talk, people are able to produce solutions if they have in this time of crisis. Business wise, of course, you can understand that there are some very difficult decisions to be taken.
Thank you. I think there's another very interesting question from Krishna Kumar. How
Yeah.
to shift from idea-driven to context-driven innovation culture?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and glad you asked it, because this is something that um I told you today as well, but I always talk about this, about how innovation is not about the solutions. It's not about the ideas that you come up with. That's the easy part, actually, because when you have a wealth of knowledge, coming up with an idea to solve it is the easy part. So to answer your question again, how to shift from this concept of, did you say idea driven to context
Context
driven?
driven, yes.
Yeah, would be, I think, to slowly, of course, bring about a problem centered or user centered way of your processes. Admittedly, it could either be for a larger organization, you have to look at what are the processes that you're using. Is it, are you rewarding the ideas that only the idea culture that people are coming up with, or also certain, I would say, insights that come out of long hours of working on certain projects, on the knowledge that they have, sharing of the knowledge. So I would say that it takes some time. There is a step-by-step way to do it. I don't have a very direct one answer to give you there, because it's a change. It's a process of change, right? So you have to start small. For me, this starting small would be something that I recommend to a lot of people, called baby steps. When you want to do something, your goal is something quite large like this, where you want to shift a perception, have your team or have a group of people uh, figure out what is the first step that you individually, as a person, as well as individually as a team, what is the first baby step that you can actually do to change that, and actually do it. And this has to be something that you can achieve in an hour, a day, right? You want to, instead of talking about the idea, talk about the context. What will you do? Will you talk to someone? Will you talk to your end user? If you don't have that, will you talk to a colleague who's from a different team, and just write a question and reach out to them? That's a baby step for me. So for me, organization wise, help people take these baby steps, and individually you can already do that. Take your first step.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please go on.
Yes.
Hi, Nitya. So I wanted to ask, after brainstorming or after coming out with ideas,
Yeah.
how do we manage the feature set that comes out of it? Like in terms of documentation and then using it to scope out the next release and so on. What are the best processes in terms of documentation of
Yeah.
features or tech
Okay.
specs?
Okay, so I'm guessing you're talking about very specific digital or tech product, right? A product
Yes.
in this case. Yeah, so one of the ways I would suggest to do it, I think one of the tools that I spoke about, the customer journey mapping, but not just that. So how I would suggest you to go about it is, after your ideation, you have a concept at hand. So you start with the customer journey map, which is breaking down every little action that a user takes in order to get from A to B. When you're working on a product specifically, there will be multiple features that address a certain step that the person is taking. So there are some extensions of the user journey map. It's a tool that is versatile also, because there are a lot of different types of extensions to that. One of that is a service blueprint, which is basically trying to go a level deeper into each of these actions, and write down what are the features, what are and also not just write down. If you use a tool such as Mural that I spoke to before, you can actually add live, I would say, screenshots or images of the feature that you're working on under it, so that it's very clear at every point for what action you're doing, what you want to get, what are the features. Documentation, again, it really helps using these kind of tools, because nobody really has the time, or nobody actually does it these days, because documentation is quite it's a time, um, time-taking task, I would say. And so when you're able to convert the work that you do directly into a document, so when you use an extension of a journey map, there are many extensions. One is called the emotional journey map. One is called the tech journey map. I'd be happy to share that link as well with you in the end.
Sure. Thank you.
So I see Chetan, you've also raised your hand. I'm just going to. Chetan, do you have a question? Okay, we'll get to it later. Till then, maybe we can look at one or two more questions, Nitya, before we wind up the
Yes.
session.
Yes.
Okay. So this is one of the questions from Chandra, like how to motivate people to innovate and foster the culture of innovation in organization.
What is this?
How do you motivate people to foster this culture of innovation within an organization?
I think I answered this in parts, but one of the things I would say is, again, um, one, innovation is usually misunderstood because it's a very broad topic, right? When you keep telling in your organization, you need to be innovative, you need to be doing this, it doesn't really work because there's no definition of what innovation means. So in order to foster that culture, I would say it is basically, first of all, rewarding when something has worked well, that came out of um, a process, or that came out of someone taking that baby step. And the second one is actually to have more, I would say, programs or more initiatives that actually help you understand what really innovation can mean, because it can be anything as small as just inter-organization, how you organize your Slack group, for example. In our own NUMA Slack, we have one specific place where it's inspiration. And so it's not, of course, just people talking about or sharing links about the innovative things they find. But we have a rule about people trying to say why they find this specific link or specific product innovative, and how in the current space that we are in right now, how we can use that, right? So it could be even a WhatsApp group as well.
There's one more question that we'll take. Krishna Kumar asks, is the absence of an end-to-end innovation platform a roadblock for driving innovation in big organization?
Tough question. Absence of an end-to-end innovation platform. So again, it could be a roadblock. I have seen a lot of cases actually where it has been a roadblock, because a large organization, as you mentioned, it's very complex. So there are a lot of different people. And if they are not communicating with each other, so if they are not sure what is happening, or even in an innovation platform, with a lack of an innovation platform, if you are not sure how each of their inputs are being used to achieve that goal, it becomes quite difficult to actually achieve something out of it. But in my opinion, I would say that an end-to-end platform is not the only solution. It could be one solution. It has worked very well for some people, where you can clearly see everyone in the organization has one place to go where they can maybe submit ideas, or even become entrepreneurs and take up projects on their own. But a platform is, again, another platform. If it is not taking into account everyone in the organization and features that address each and every person from different departments and enable them to use it, that can be more of a problem than a solution in my case. So well-designed one, yes, I think that would be a really good solution.
Okay, thank you. Shall we wind up?
Yes.
Okay, I think thank you everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you found the session insightful. We had a great time hosting you. What we'll do after this session is we'll be sending across to you some material, of course, the recording of the webinar as well. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your feedback. And the question that Nitya asked, that what are some of the tools that you use? We want this to be more of an interactive and a platform where everybody could share some of insights or some of the knowledge that they have. So do reply to us. Do tell us what are some of the tools that you use that you found very useful in working with your teams. What we'll also do is we've created a Slack channel specifically dedicated to innovators, where we're going to be discussing a lot of insights, a lot of talk about tools, talk about what's happening in the innovation ecosystem. And we're going to be sharing the link with you in the email. Do join that group, and we look forward to being connected with all of you. And we're going to be hosting a lot of these sessions in the coming weeks. These are called NUMA Expert Series, and we'll keep you in loop. And yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it would also be great if you have some specific topics or experts that you would like to hear from.
Yeah.
We obviously have a lot of interesting people in mind, but it's really all for you. So if you have if you want a masterclass on something specific, or if you want a panel session, please let us know so that we can arrange it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.